right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to What Attackers Know, What Auditors Ask, a joint CMMC Intel briefing. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar will run roughly 30 to 45 minutes. We will have some time at the end for questions. If you're having any audio or visual issues, please just drop a note in the chat box and our moderators will help address the questions. Quickly, I am Ashley Hibbs. I am on the federal sales team here at ControlCase. And Franco, Eric, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure, I'll go first. My name is Franco Velasquez. I'm the CEO and founder of HostBreach. We're a Intel-driven cybersecurity advisory firm. I'm a Navy veteran, and I have over a decade of experience in cybersecurity as a practitioner supporting regulated industries such as FedRAMP, CMMC, PCI, and so on and so forth in the private and in the public industries.
My name is Eric Winkler, and I head up the federal practice here at ControlCase. I have been with ControlCase for over 18 years and have been in the IT audit space for more than 20 years, and have been focused on providing federal audits in the CMMC and FedRAMP space for the last 6 years, and kind of go back to that. I've been providing those assessments as a member of the ControlCase federal practice.
Great. Well, without further ado, I guess we can go ahead and get started. And by the way, these slides will be available after the presentation. We will get them out early next week.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. All right. So first of all, what we will be covering here are the Q1 and Q2 DIB threat reports that are released by DC3. So DC3 DCISE, this is the agency who receives the voluntary and the mandatory reporting from a DoD contractor once they become breached per the DFARS 7012 clause. So this report in front of you today is a Q1, and I know it has a lot of pie charts and tables and things like this, but what we're going to be covering here are a few things that kind of stood out to us. And first of all, 17% is one of the things that really stuck out to us. And 17% is the number of incidents that were reported to DC3 that had something to do with ransomware, which was a spike from the previous quarter, which was a spike of 52%. Now, again, there's a lot of things going on in this report, but I'll draw your attention to the table that says common initial access vectors. And in particular, valid accounts. If you look at valid accounts as an initial access vector, and you look at the study performed by Hudson Rock that tells us that you can buy these information malware stealer kits for as little as $10 in the dark web, and you can see how that's a very common thing nowadays. And if you couple that with a 65% password reuse rate across the largest DIB suppliers, you know that once that password has been leaked on the dark web, the chances of that password being used in one application is pretty high. So the risk is significant. And here we have that evidence in front of us. Now, we're going to jump into the next slide where we talk about these common initiatives in more in depth. So we already went through valid accounts. The next thing that was very dominant, a very dominant tactic reported to DC3 was phishing. Of course, we know this is not just something particular to the DIB. This is affecting many industries, right? So phishing is a big one, whether that's through spear phishing, through the links that you click on, or through the attachments that you download. Exploitation of public-facing applications. So these are vulnerabilities that exist in anything that's public-facing to the internet. So if you have a vulnerability or weakness in an application, these adversaries, they are exploiting them. Now, one of the things that's really scary here that I saw was a drive-by compromise that's reported here as a dominant tactic as well. And this drive-by compromise, the reason why I say it's scary is because you don't need to click on anything. You don't need to download anything. The moment a user lands on a website and that website is loaded, that user could become compromised. And, if you're running an out-of-date browser, that puts you more at risk, right? So external remote services, these could be legitimate services, things like your help desk IT support, your VPN. These are things that adversaries are scanning. And if there's a vulnerability, again, they will exploit. So these are ways that adversaries are gaining initial unauthorized access into the DoD contractors' networks. So moving on to Q2, one of the things that stood out was that it looked like ransomware went away for us here at 63% drop, which I think it really has more to do with the way that they're categorizing things differently in this quarter. And the reason is, as you probably can guess it, it's because of AI, right? They're talking and they're categorizing things here differently. There's deep fakes and voice phishing, AI enabled phishing, and there's also this QR code business going on. Now that we've touched on how DoD contractors are actually being breached, this agency, this DoD Cyber Crime Center agency, they're literally telling us how these DoD contractors have become breached, how these adversaries gained initial unauthorized access into their environment. So what we've done on HostBreach is, when we engage with you, we've put together an intelligence engine that is mapped one-to-one to the same things that adversaries are looking for. So we perform the same sort of reconnaissance that an adversary would do, except we don't exploit, we report it. So we'll show you some red team attack paths. We'll show a demo on this as well. We look at things like your contract obligations, and all we need is your domain to get started. It's all using open source intelligence gathering methods, all OSINT and all passive. So the things that we look for are things like your email security status, the same thing that an adversary would do. We look at your SPF, your DMARC, how easy it would be to spoof or phish your organization, or how easy it would be to impersonate, let's say, your CEO, right? Another thing we look for are your public-facing vulnerabilities. This is important because it's mapping, it's mirroring exactly what the DCISE is telling us. During our scan, we also look at dark web for leak credentials, and we look for information malware stealer log campaigns against your domain. Now, we offer this as a one-time snapshot as early as you become a prospect for us. And we don't need anything except your domain to get started. We incorporate this into the overall CMMC journey. Now, we provide you not just with a list of things, but we contextualize things for you. We contextualize your exposure in a way that any executive could understand. So, well, one thing that we provide to you will be the SUS score, which is a number, a rating from 0 to 100. We do provide you the counts of credential and vulnerabilities, and we give you the information count, information stealer count. But another thing that we do is we contextualize all of this exposure running a hacker simulation. So once we run that hacker simulation against your exposure and against your risks that we've been able to identify, we are able to give you two additional metrics. One is the CUI exfiltration risk percentage. This is a percentage of how likely an APT would be if they were to go after your organization. Another thing you'll get from us is how long it will take for that APT, for that hacker, to get to that CUI. So CMMC is coming to help us to protect the CUI, right? We don't want this sort of information falling into the wrong hands of a foreign adversary, and we don't want the same sort of innovation to come and be stolen and be developed in another country, right? So we want to bring that sort of context and ensure that your leadership is aware of why they're making this investment of CMMC and why it's important. And the way, again, that we contextualize this and bring value is by showcasing how your exposure could actually be taken advantage of and exploited by an adversary. So we offer this as a continuous intelligence layer that's complementary to your CMMC advisory with us. And what's interesting is that initially today you could be winning contracts on your own, but 6 months or a year from now, you may be using a joint venture. And we are actually able to pick up on those supply chain risks. Now, a little bit about the AI attack simulation. So, of course, it's AI powered. But one thing I will want to mention is that we require no network access. We don't need to install any sort of agents in your environment. And we don't do any active scanning. So it's all OSINT and passive. For those of you who are more technical, we do map our hacker simulation to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So if you want to cover down on those techniques, on those TTPs, you can do so. And for the executives in the room, you do get a 4-phase attack scenario. So it's easy for you to just digest from initial access all the way down to moving through the environment and down to the CUI getting exfiltrated out. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Control Case, where they'll break it down by control and how we support that.
Thank you, Franco. So from a CMMC perspective, each of these 7 controls shown here obviously have some requirements that can be supported through the use of host breach services. For instance, obviously the external system inventory and asset discovery. You want to make sure that you maintain an accurate picture and description of all your assets that you're using in your within your CMMC boundary. The identification of obviously compromised credentials and the info stealer data obviously goes is another control area within 357 to support your CMMC environment. You have, in addition to that, you have the historical breach and threat intelligence data, along with the external vulnerability discovery. The combination of those helping you meet your IR control and your RA control in that order. The additional RA control of being able to track your unremediated vulnerabilities and keep those vulnerabilities within a POAM list. Obviously, you'll have the remediation evidence that's provided by that Intel layer that you can actually include that in your POAMs and support your CMMC compliance with that POAM list. And then in as far as the SC control family with 3.13.8, you have obviously the email security misconfigurations that if those are identified, help you support this 3.13.8 control. And then lastly, technology stack and version discovery obviously can support the SI family control and help you stay in compliance with 3.14.1. So again, it's a holistic approach to supporting these 7 key CMMC controls, and the evidence, obviously, again from the Intel layer, can be used to support your compliance with these 7 CMMC controls. I'll turn it back to you, Franklin. Thank you.
Of course. So now it's time for the live demo. So what we'll do is we'll run through. I'll share my screen now. Okay, so we're now at the live demo of this fictitious company called SentinelDynamics.com. So this will be used. So this is the demo that we're going to be using to showcase what we pull up. So right away, we perform again the same sort of reconnaissance that any adversary would conduct against your organization. And right away, we see the industry. We see how many employees they have. We see the DoD business obligation, their primary NAICS code, and we give you a trust score. Again, for this organization, fictitious it's not a real one, right? But we've been able to assign them a 38, and they're in critical risk. And how we come up with that is we look at your overall exposure like an adversary. And for this organization, we found 168 leaked credentials in the dark web. There's 31 public-facing vulnerabilities. We've been able to identify 12 subdomains, and their email security status, the SPF and DMARC, which are critical for preventing phishing and spoofing impersonation. That's not correctly set up for this organization. And we've been able to identify 18 information malware, stealer malware infections on this domain. So on top of that, like I said earlier, you do get 2 metrics, the time to breach and the CUI exfiltration likelihood. So that's based on a red team hacker simulation. And if this were to be exploited and your organization does face a breach, you could be, this is the estimated exposure in dollar amounts. All right. Down towards the bottom, you do receive a threat spotlight. So we are able to pick up on your, for your industry, these are the active threat actors. This is the sort of data that's at risk. This is how many we've been tracking in the last 24 months, how many reports we've been tracking. And we also look at whether or not your organization has been involved in a breach. So for this particular company, we see we picked up 3 breaches in the last 24 months for them. Now, I'm going to move over to the next tab, Red Team, which is a hacker simulation. A hacker simulation, they're going to scope out your users who they think are going to be handling that sensitive data, in this case, CUI. So as you can see here, the first thing you'll notice is the primary targets who we would be sending out spear phishing campaigns against. And then I'm going to skip right through to the bottom for a second here, just to show you that for the infections, for the active information stealer infections, we actually know the URLs for those infections. So for example, SharePoint has been identified, Citrix, some of the VPNs. And now I can go up to the top and you'll have a little bit of context here, because this is a simulated hacker simulation, right? So this is a simulated attack. And for the initial unauthorized access, we're going to use the same sort of tactics that we heard are already in play in the industry. And we see that the 18 information malware infections, when we have these information malware infections, we're not just stealing credentials. These adversaries, they're stealing also session cookies, which could be used to bypass multi-factor authentication. So we see that in this simulation, they're gaining access into the SharePoint, because remember, we saw that SharePoint has some credentials and cookies, session tokens identified to that URL. So they can bypass a lot of those security controls and gain access to these environments. They're also going to use the 168 breach credentials from historical breaches in the dark web and try to gain access to something like the VPN. Another thing that I want to highlight here in this initial access is the fact that they have some staging and development environments. So they have like a staging server, and these sorts of environments, they typically don't receive the same sort of TLC, tender loving care, that a production environment would typically receive, right? So in these environments, we tend to find things like hard-coded passwords. We tend to find passwords that have been left behind in some sort of file, right? So this development and staging environment is going to present a high value initial access vector, right? Now, in parallel to all of this, the adversaries could launch a targeted spear phishing campaign against the folks above. And because they have no SPF and DMARC security for their email, we know that the success here to spoof the CEO and impersonate the CFO, for example, and start sending out emails like them and asking for all sorts of information to people like this individual here, who's the director of Navy programs, is going to be pretty high, right? So, and then another last thing here, we've also been able to identify some credentials and session cookies for something like a GitLab. And of course, if you gain access into something like a GitLab, I mean, you got all sorts of things in there, like an API key, database credentials, and so on and so forth. Now, we won't walk through every single phase in detail, but you can see here, there's establishing the foothold, right? Creating those back doors, all the way down to moving throughout the environment laterally and discovering the CUI. So they're going to be looking for things like a backup server, for example. They're going to look through your SharePoint. They're going to study the documentation there. They're going to start to identify where the CUI lives. And then down to the last phase of, well, how are we going to get this out? Again, using your tech stack, we've been able to identify OneDrive, SharePoint, right? So we can think that we could get this out if we were an adversary through those legitimate means, through those legitimate traffic channels. And then you can see here how we also map everything down to the MITRE attack tactics, right? So, and so this, hopefully you're able to see how we can contextualize this information now, and a leader in your organization can see, well, this makes sense now to start to make these sorts of investments to protect that CUI, because at the end of the day, we need to think like this, like an adversary, right? Because this is what they're after when it comes to the defense industry. They want to be able to steal that innovative solution and do it somewhere else, right? For cheaper or faster, make it at a faster rate in production as well. So the next tab is the CMMC practices. And what we do here is we're not affirming anything. We're not saying you have this in place or you don't have this in place. What we're simply saying here is based on your exposure, based on the tech stack that we've been able to identify, based on our hacker simulation, these are security practices that we think you need to put in place and you need to prioritize. Okay, so and then what we do is we map those practices back to CMMC level 2 control recommendations, right? So for the first one is the SPF, right? Implementing that multi-factor authentication control, remediating that critical vulnerabilities and things like that. So we're mapping everything back to that, and we can start having that discussion around CMMC now. Notice another tab that we have here is the CUI handling strategy. So right off the bat, we can come to the table without asking for any information, with no questionnaires whatsoever, and we can make a recommendation based on your threat profile and also based on the DoD obligation percentage that we identify and on your size, right? So we can bring this sort of intel up front without having to go through a bunch of questionnaires and calls to scope you out. Here's the tech stack that we've been able to identify from the outside and the exposed subdomains. The next step over is going to be your business risk. So it's going to tell us how many active opportunities are there for this NICE code, what's the value estimated in dollar amount here. And then also we give you a critical business risk section where we say, hey, listen, based on this particular threat profile, we think your organization really needs to take immediate action, because the DC3 under DIB threat reports tells us that other DoD contractors with a similar threat profile have been breached. And those breaches could open up doors to unwanted scrutiny, unwanted sorts of liability. And so we're trying to really close we're trying to mitigate that risk here for you. So this brings us now to the end of this demo. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to come back now to the rest of the team.
Thank you, Franco. We do have a few questions here. The first one is, in order to get started with HostBreach, what sort of architecture needs to be in place? Where does the customer need to be in the CMMC process?
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Great question. To get started with us, all we need is your domain, and as early as possible is the better answer here, because we want to know how the adversary could scope you out from the outside, and we want to incorporate that into your overall CMMC journey.
Does the SSP need to be complete?
Absolutely not. The SSP and any of your documentation that you would be submitting as your package to the assessment team, you don't need to have any of those completed. In fact, you don't need to have any of those started for us to begin with our intel recon sort of work that we do here.
Good to know. Let's see, another question. How does HostBreach work with ControlCase, and how would they integrate as a partnership to work with ControlCase or any of the other C3PAOs?
Good. So we're a trusted partner with ControlCase, and we're an advisory firm, and we use our proprietary intel engine to build this whole with our intel into your overall CMMC journey. And once we know that we are ready with a mock assessment, and we bring in the lead TCAs and the TCPs to help us to ensure that you're ready, you then work with ControlCase and the CPAO to ensure that you're ready to pass your assessment.
Right. I think we are just out of time, but I will make sure that our team reaches out to you and addresses any questions or any additional questions rather, and we will get these slides out to you all in the next week or so. So that concludes our presentation. We thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, you can visit either of our websites. It's www.controlcase.com or www.hostbreach.com, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.